Celtic Badass of the Week showcases a different badass person of Celtic heritage each week. Those who exemplify the give no shit attitude and come out on top. They may come from our past or our present, but rest assured they come from all walks of life and legend. They are men, women, even old ladies and pirate queens. You don't have to be a muscled-up Celt in a fur kilt swinging a mighty sword. You can just be a 4'11" Welsh woman and suffragette who knows jujitsu. Most of these badasses are all too real. While some may be only legend, badass legends though. The only prerequisite for this title is Celtic blood and badassedness. Jeanne De Clisson. There had been black ships on the horizon, 3 of them almost mystically appearing through the thick fog on the English Channel like ghosts emerging from the veil of death itself. Crimson sails, red as blood, propelled them terrifyingly through the water with an inescapable speed. The Baron's men had done what they could. Archers launched fire arrows. Armored marines came to grapples with sword, spear, and axe. But in the end, the ferocity of the terrifying pirate fleet was too much. They were overrun in minutes, and she came, the pirate queen from hell, calmly striding along the deck, dragging a fearsome, well-worn axe behind her. She picked out the leader. Her men pushed him down to the deck, and she lopped off the man's head like she was preparing a pineapple for a badass pirate pina colada. Now it was a cold, gray, rain-soaked day towards the end of the year 1346, when the heavy wood and iron doors of the Lord's Keep were slammed open with a jarring amount of force. A pair of guards quickly escorted 2 badly wounded Frenchmen out of the rain into the darkly lit gray hall, hurrying them forward with a sense of urgency. The men were pitiful to see, stripped of their weapons, armor, and uniform insignia, and bleeding from cuts and bruises across their bodies. Their eyes held the gaze of men who had witnessed untold horrors. Without even beginning to know how the hell to process their reality, with a heavy sigh and the urging of the Baron, the 2 exhausted French sailors began relating their horrifying story. She picked out these 2 Frenchmen by hand, pointing to them seemingly at random. Her men immediately went to work decapitating every other surviving member of the crew. Before heading down below decks to check the hold for treasure and plunder, the pirate queen looked both survivors in the eye with a cold, hateful stare. You have been left alive," she said, "to tell your king that La Tigresse Bretonne has claimed another of his ships. Congreve was right. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." King Philip the Fortunate probably would have been wise to consider that before illegally arresting and executing Lady Jeanne De Clisson's husband, confiscating her land and declaring her an outlaw to the French crown. Jean-Louise de Belleville was born in the year 1300, the daughter of a noble family from Brittany, which is that little pointy peninsula on the northwest tip of France. It's also a Celtic nation. Now, at the ripe old age of 12, she was married off to a 19-year-old French nobleman named Geoffrey, and went off to live in this awesome manor. They had 2 kids together, but he died in 1326, and 4 years later, Jeanne was married again. This time to a dashing, handsome, super-rich French nobleman named Oliver III de Clisson. Wow. By all accounts, Oliver and Jeanne were truly in love. Plus, this guy had an awesome castle outside Nantes that overlooked a scenic river, which is kind of cool. The Lord and Lady Clisson were obviously pretty happy in their Brittany villa because they had 5 kids. Didn't end up having to butcher anyone with an axe, and don't really do anything historically notable between 1326 and 1343. Their castle still stands to this day, and I don't know, I wouldn't mind spending a summer here. Fortunately, life in paradise came crashing down to an abrupt and pretty quickly 100 Years' War broke out between England and France in 1337. And even if you don't know anything about the 100 Years' War, you can probably use context, clues, and the powers of deduction to figure out that it lasted about 100 years. So it's probably pretty safe to say that it was a fairly horrific and intense situation for both sides. At its core, the 100 Years' War was a stupid argument over who should be the King of France after the old King of France died without leaving an heir. Well, Lord Oliver III of Clisson sided with the King Philip the Fortunate of France at first, signing on as a badass knight and leading a cavalry attack against the English invaders. But King Edward of England used the power of persuasion and probably a ton of gold to convince Oliver that, yeah, maybe we should side with England instead. Oliver stopped sending troops to Philip the Fortunate. Philip got mad and had his guards arrest Oliver while the Lord of Clisson was attending a jousting tournament in Nantes. Philip and a small group of nobles declared him a traitor to the crown, hung him, then cut off his head and hung it on the walls of Nantes. Then Philip wrote up a decree that Jeanne was a traitor like her husband, and he ordered her to be arrested and have all their property seized and confiscated. When Lady Clisson received word of her husband's death, the 43-year-old widow didn't break down. She didn't weep uncontrollably. She didn't pop a Xanax and listen to sad songs. She grabbed her axe, a suit of armor, ordered her chamberlain to sell every valuable thing she had, packed her 7 kids up in a ship, and sailed it right to the gates of Nantes. When she got there, she had her kids come out and see her father's head mounted on the walls of the city. Now, do not forget this, she said. Do not ever forgive this. Seek vengeance at all costs. I don't know what background music was playing while this happened, but I bet it was epic. Now, Jeanne De Clisson sold all of her land, jewels, worldly possessions, and used the money to buy 3 massive warships. She painted them black, outfitted them with blood-red sails, hired crews of bloodthirsty marauders, and used the extra cash to bribe the lords of Brittany not to sell her out to the king. Then she went to work. It's uncertain how long the Tigress of Brittany, aka the Lioness of Brittany, marauded, pillaged, raped, murdered, decapitated, and otherwise horrifically massacred every French vessel in the Channel. Estimates range anywhere from 5 months to 2 years. Now, it doesn't matter. Consider that Blackbeard's entire career in piracy lasted for less than 2 years. And you realize that a pirate armada can do a hell of a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. Now, her mission was simple: attack anything with a French flag. They took the head of her lover, so now she was going to rain down so many decapitated heads that they'd wish they'd never heard of an executioner's axe. She personally whacked the commander and any nobleman on board, chopping off their heads and throwing the bodies overboard. Now, her crew would kill any other survivors, but they would always leave 2 men alive to tell King Philip the Fortunate just what had happened. Now, to make shit even worse for him, Philip the Fortunate couldn't do much to stop this raiding fleet because most of the French fleet had been annihilated by the English at the Battle of Sluys in 1340. And in 1343, he couldn't exactly spare the troops, money, or supplies that would be necessary for an expedition to chase a trio of pirate ships all around the western coast of France. Now, it wasn't long before the Black Fleet's reign of destruction caught the eye of King Edward of England. Now, old Ed, he was super into the fact that Jeanne didn't attack English ships, so he actually ended up granting her land, titles, and money to thank her for her help clearing the channel of the enemy. She repaid his debt by ferrying supplies, men, and arrows from England to France to help support the English during the Battle of Crécy. Now, we all know how most pirate stories end, with our hero swinging from the end of a noose. But Jeanne De Clisson's doesn't go down that way. Instead of finally paying the price for her terrifying killing spree, she actually marries an English lord in 1349, settles down in a sweet castle somewhere on the coast of Brittany, outlives Philip the Fortunate, and dies peacefully around 1359. Her son Oliver IV inherited her estate. He was a charming boy, took after his mother, and is known to history as Oliver the Butcher for his bad attitude on the battlefield. Now, Oliver eventually retook the castle that had once belonged to his mother and father, and as I said, the building still stands today. The French resistance even used it as a fortress to fight the Nazis during World War II, which is pretty badass. It is said that the spirits of the tortured lovers are said to haunt the ruins of the castle to this day. She's badass even in the afterlife. Alright.